in Oakland, we talk a lot about the value of lived experience. And so I think it's important to look for good information wherever you can find it. The professor has brought to the table a lot of academic work around this, and I think that's certainly valuable. But I would also say that in Oakland, we've been to the school of hard knocks when it comes to what can go wrong when you make deals with sports teams. And so, I think we probably agree in many ways with the professor on the essential questions that we need to grapple with as a city in order to decide, is any potential deal that comes before the city a good deal or a bad deal? Are we overpaying? Are we not paying enough? Are we providing more subsidy than is required? Are we getting enough benefit, right? So some of the really guiding questions that we have grappled with as staff in these negotiations is, what is an equitable distribution of the substantial costs of building infrastructure, both on and off site, between the public and private parties, both of whom will benefit greatly, honestly, from that? How do we protect future generations of Oakland taxpayers from being left holding the bag, so to speak, as we have been by sports deals of the past? How do we use this project to catalyze public investment like that $375 million in infrastructure money that we just talked about, and to optimize the public benefits of the project rather than just the private benefits of the project? And how do we ensure that we can build this project in a way that ensures both the port and the city can continue to grow and thrive? So I am not going to read every word on this page, but I just wanted to sort of give you council members on the CED committee a little bit of a rubric or a cheat sheet in terms of how we on the negotiating team think about, this and grapple with this question of, is this a good deal? And is this a deal I would feel comfortable going in a public meeting and telling the decision makers of my city, I think this is a good deal and you should go forward with it or not, right? So there's two sort of sides to this coin, risk and reward, right? So there are any number of different deal scenarios that could come forward. This is not meant to be exhaustive of all potential transaction structures, but to give you sort of a yardstick, for lack of a better term, of thinking about risk. So highest risk scenarios would be ones in which the city is responsible for funding and building all offsite infrastructure on a schedule prescribed by the A's, regardless of whether or not we're ever able to secure enough federal, state, and regional funding. I think this is the scenario which the professor's report assumes we're in. City forms an IFD and issues the LOB and uses those LOB proceeds to reimburse the A's for on-site infrastructure, meaning that we don't have the ability to use those proceeds for off-site infrastructure. And you have to then think about, if we're essentially acting as a contractor, for lack of a better term, in building this offsite infrastructure, and it needs to be done by a date certain, what happens if that date comes and goes? What's the city's liability? Taking that risk down a notch might involve the city still being responsible for funding all of that offsite infrastructure, but keeping the non-property tax increment, the ability to issue the LOB, and to use that to supplement federal, state, and regional funding for offsite infrastructure. It might also involve sharing the responsibility for actually constructing offsite infrastructure between the city and the A's, and limiting the city's liability related to being able to perform on its responsibilities related to constructing offsite infrastructure. Again, reducing the city's, and this is all from the city's perspective, reducing the city's risk kind of another level. We could form an IFD, retain all that non-property tax increment. We could sort of divvy up responsibility for paying for and building offsite infrastructure in various ways that make sense. I mean, one way is really looking at who benefits most greatly from a particular piece of infrastructure. There's also just pragmatic considerations like construction sequencing and where construction trucks that are building on site are going to be using off-site streets, and so there's pragmatic considerations that might come into play there. And then the lowest risk would be the city forms an IFD, never issues a lob, keeps all the rest of the tax increment, and simply acts as a pass-through entity for all of this federal, state, and regional infrastructure funding, with the developer acting as our agent to build it, which is what we did at the Army base. So again, these are not all of the scenarios. This is just an example for when and if a deal actually does come back to the council for consideration, to think about this question of risk. And then the other side of the coin that we are always looking at is benefit, and how do we maximize that? And so, the lowest public benefit scenario in this case, in my view, or in our negotiating team's view, would be one in which Howard Terminal isn't redeveloped. This valuable waterfront property continues to be used for essentially container storage, which is not a water dependent use and can be easily accommodated elsewhere in the city and the port. There's no public access to the waterfront. Our property tax receipts continue in perpetuity at about $75,000 a year. We do go ahead, as I noted, with our $375 million in planned infrastructure investments, and the A's may leave Oakland. I'm too definitive here, so I'll change that before I post it, because we don't know. Moderate reward would be one in which the ballpark district moves forward. We get 18 acres of new waterfront parks, a 1.5 mile extension of the Bay Trail. That would be a long Bay Trail. We get affordable housing per our current code. We get an expanded tax base once the IFD terminates and any lob bonds have been matured. We get probably more investment in infrastructure, more jobs, and the A's stay in Oakland, but perhaps with a non-relocation agreement that doesn't really give us everything we would like in terms of security about how long they'll stay and what we can do about it if they decide to leave. And then in the highest reward scenario, we would get all of those things, but we would also get substantially more affordable housing. We would get a community fund, and we would enjoy a larger tax base immediately if we don't ever issue the lob. And we would get a much more robust non-relocation agreement.